Chapter 52. A Queen's Secret. Daeron stared at the four men and the sole woman standing in his chamber. He took turns to stare at the men more as they held all the power in the room. Here I was fighting battle after battle in the south to restore peace to Westeros and bring the armies of the south to aid us in the long night. Then I hear the lords of the north, who knew our lives and that of the whole continent were at stake, engaged in a shadow war of sorts that put our preparations at stake. Daeron eyed them all. Shame on you all. Your Grace, we were Manderly started to say, but Daeron talked over the Castellan of Winterfell. I don't want to hear who started it or place blame back and forth. I was clear on my orders regarding the preparations for the war for Dawn. Old or new grudges were to be kept aside for the duration of the war. No actions were to be taken that jeopardize war preparations. And yet I find out from reliable sources that White Harbor refused to release valuable resources bound for Hornwood. Lord Hornwood is at fault here, Your Grace. White Harbor could only hold so much of supplies in our warehouses. Lord Hornwood did not send his men to collect the supplies bound for his lands. So, we had to disperse the supplies to other houses as the next shipment of dragonglass came from Dragonstone. Lord Wyman Manderly said, casting a dirty look at Lawrence Hornwood, who remained silent throughout the time. Daeron stared hard at the Lord of White Harbor at the blatant lie the man had just told him. But he chose not to call out the man on it. After all, he didn't want the Lord of White Harbor to know that he had spies that could inform him of the volume of trade White Harbor engages in a day. Varys spy networks were not just little children running around passing gossip and drunken rumors. There were other well-placed spies in the employ of the Spider, which was one reason Daeron spared Varys from the chopping block. Lord Hornwood, do you have something to say? Daeron asked, turning his eyes on the newly appointed Lord of Hornwood. Your Grace knows Hornwood suffered under Bolton rule. The castle's garrison was gutted, and it was not easy to restore all the positions promptly. As such, I had to depend on the help of Lord Serwyn to restore the garrison of Hornwood. I had charged Lord Serwyn's men to collect and transport the supplies from White Harbor. But they were denied access to those supplies, said Lawrence Hornwood. Your Grace, how were we to know Lord Serwyn's men were collecting Lord Hornwood's supplies? Lord Wyman protested, his portly cheeks twisting at an odd angle while sneering at Lawrence Hornwood. I had sent a raven in advance. And if that wasn't enough, I sent a sealed parchment with the men stating I've charged them with escorting the dragon glass weapons to Hornwood. Lawrence Hornwood quickly rebutted Lord Manderly. I received no such word from Hornwood. Lord Manderly said grossly, glaring at Lawrence Hornwood, who glared back. Enough! Daeron shouted, staring at everyone in the room. Are you hearing yourself when you talk? You sound like a pack of children squabbling over a slice of cake. Daeron said frostily, looking disappointedly at the men in the room. Your Grace, if you open your mouth one more time, I'll have you fed to my dragon. Daeron threatened, glaring at the Lord of White Harbor, who thankfully shut his mouth with an audible snap. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes to calm down. After he made sure he had a good hold on his emotions, Daeron opened his eyes, ready to tackle the situation at hand. I have already discussed the issue of Lady Winifred's betrothal with Sir Wylis. It has been decided that shall serve as my wife's lady-in-waiting until a match is found to her liking. I assure you, her prospective husband will be from one of the great houses of Westeros. All costs for the wedding shall also be borne by House Targaryen, as I take full responsibility for the breaking of her first betrothal, said Daeron. Daeron glared at Lord Serwyn when the man opened his mouth, making Clay Serwyn shut up. It was my fault for rushing the betrothal without properly seeking the approval of the prospective bride and groom. My only goal was to settle the succession of Hornwood, and for that, I unequivocally apologize to all of you. But if I hear even a whiff of conflict or any action that threaten the war preparations, however inane it might be, you'll all know firsthand the folly of attracting the wrath of the dragon. Am I clear? Yes, Your Grace. The Manderleys, Serwins and Lord Hornwood murmured, bowing at the waist. Good. We're fighting death itself. If we squabble amongst ourselves at this time, we'll only weaken ourselves. Keep this in mind, my lords. The North deserves better from houses Manderley, Hornwood and Serwin. Daeron let out a sigh of relief and rubbed his forehead once his guests took their leave. He hoped they'd stop this shadow war, at least until the war was won. After that, they'd be the responsibility of the Warden of the North, which happened to be an 11-year-old Rickon. Poor kid. Daeron thought. Are you going to come in any time soon, husband? Daeron heard the voice of his wife ask for him from their shared room. He looked at the mountain of parchments on his desk and the brown door at the far end of the chamber where his wife was waiting for him. These reports can wait. Daeron decided, standing up from his chair and moving towards his wife, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for some time. He had half expected her to come to his aid while he was dealing with the wayward lords of the North. Instead, Dany had kept to herself in their bedroom. Are you all right? If you're tired from the travels, perhaps. Daeron trailed off as he opened the doors only to see his lady wife dressed in a fitting white dress with gold linings. The dress hugged her curves in all the right places, exuding his wife's beauty 100-fold. Daeron took a deep breath, taking in the rosy scent that permeated every corner of the room. He needed a moment to gather himself, and that was all the time his wife needed to stride across the room. Daeron was startled when he was dragged into the bed by his wife. He found himself sitting on the edge of the bed, looking up at his wife with his mouth agape. What tray you? I have something important to discuss with you, said Daenerys, her eyes holding a certain gleam of seriousness that took Daeron aback. What is it? Daeron looked into her amethyst eyes with trepidation. The tension in the room was palpable as Daeron waited for his wife to say something. Daenerys sauntered towards him and slipped into his lap with grace. I think I'm pregnant, Daenerys whispered, a smile blossoming on her lips. Wait. What did you just say? Daeron looked at his wife with wide eyes. I think Daenerys leaned closer towards his left ear. Our child is growing in my belly, she whispered throatily. What? Daeron gulped. Are you certain? I think so. I have been getting sick for the last 2 weeks, and I miss my moon's blood. Have you checked with the maester? Daeron asked. No, I have not. Then, I'll call the maester. Daeron was swiftly cut off by Daenerys, covering his mouth with her palm. I don't want to check right away with the maester, said Daenerys, her eyes holding nothing but love and lust in them. Daeron understood what his wife required him to do at the moment. I suppose we can celebrate tonight, smirked Daeron, dragging the straps of his wife's dress down her shoulders. The glowing smile he received from Daenerys spoke volumes about her thoughts on the matter. Arya found her sister walking towards Daeron's chambers in the night. Well, Sansa was not exactly sneaking in her opinion, but Arya was curious why her sister would approach Daeron late in the night. She kept a safe distance from her older sister while melting into the shadows. For some strange reason, her cousin had dismissed the guards standing outside his chambers for the night. Arya frowned when she saw Sansa stop before Daeron's room. She could see Sansa's hand rise to knock on the door, but her sister seemed to have frozen up. Deciding enough discretion had been shown from her side, Arya walked out of her hiding spot to confront her sister. Her footsteps were as silent as a cat walking towards its prey. Sansa. Oh. Sansa jumped in fright, her mouth covered with the palm of her hand for not screaming out loud. You scared me, Sansa whispered angrily. Yes, I can see that, Arya deadpanned. What are you doing outside Daeron's room late at night? I can't seek out my cousin in my own home now? Sansa asked challengingly. Be my guest, said Arya, taking a few steps back and gesturing towards the door. Sansa looked flushed all of a sudden under the light of the oil lamp she was carrying. "Maybe you'll just speak with him in the morning," Sansa said, looking uncomfortable. A throaty moan came from the other side of the door, startling Arya while making Sansa more embarrassed. Arya couldn't help but smirk as she heard quite vocal sounds coming from the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms while sharing the bed with her cousin. "So, that's why you were frozen like a newly wedded maid," Arya snarked, chuckling at the red face of her older sister. "Keep your voice down. You'll disturb them," Sansa admonished her. "They've been going at it almost every day since they married. Not even the others can make them stop once they are fucking each other in a bed," Arya said crudely, shrugging her shoulders like it was common knowledge. "Arya!" Sansa hissed at her sister to keep quiet. "Faster, my love." Arya grinned while Sansa's cheeks became as red as her hair, hearing the pleasurable moans and groan coming from their cousin's bedroom. "I told him to take the Lord's chambers, but he wouldn't listen. He wanted his old room for some reason," Sansa muttered, embarrassed out of her mind as the sounds coming from Daeron's chambers only picked up pace. "Come. We should not be here." Arya allowed herself to be dragged away by her older sister from the loud and passionate coupling of her cousin and his wife. She could not help but be happy for her cousin, who had admittedly a worse-off childhood than she ever did. It was one of the reasons why she could forgive Sansa for everything that happened after they traveled from Winterfell. It was so easy to blame Sansa for being a lovesick girl, willfully blind to the monster that was Joffrey and everything that happened afterwards. She supposed that even if Sansa were to have spoken the truth of what she saw at the Ruby Ford, she doubted it'd have been enough to change anything significant. Her father would have still gone to King's Landing, and Joffrey would have never been punished anyway because of Cersei. In the unlikely scenario that something changed at the Ruby Ford, Arya supposed she'd have been sent away to Winterfell. And that'd have taken her out of the path of joining the Faceless Men. In fact, Arya realized that whatever happened, despite the many tragedies her family went through, had most likely given her the best chance of survival. Without the training by Syrio and the Faceless Men, she'd have been useless in the war against the Freys and Lannisters. "So, what were you doing outside Daeron's chambers late at night?" asked Arya once she was comfortably seated across from Sansa, who also regained some of her composure. "Well, I wanted to know what he decided to do with the Hornwood-Manderley dispute." "A poor attempt at lying. You might learn to mask yourself in King's Landing, but that won't work on me." "Tell me the truth," said Arya, frowning at her older sister. "A raven came from King's Landing. The trial of Cersei Lannister has concluded. Sir Willis Manderley has sentenced her to die." "Why do you look unhappy?" Arya asked with a frown. "Because Cersei demanded a trial by combat," Sansa growled, her eyes shining with malice. "Daeron should have cut off her head when he took the Red Keep. Do you think she can escape what's coming for her? Daeron will burn anyone foolish enough to support her with his dragon." Arya scoffed. "It's not that father never had a chance to defend himself. He was threatened to make a false admission, and he did it to protect me. And yet they killed him all the same." Sansa sobbed. "Father died because of me. And I can't stand it to see Cersei and her spawn were afforded rights that never applied to our father." Arya sat there frozen on her chair, confused about what to do, as Sansa cried in front of her. She was tempted to affirm the blame on Sansa, and she'd not be wrong to do so to a certain extent. After all, Sansa's obsession with Joffrey and her blind ambition to become queen had resulted in the death of Micah, one of her childhood friends. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath while suppressing the urge to blame Sansa. She firmly believed the dead cared not for the opinions of the living. If she was feeling any hostility to Sansa, it was her own problem. "I was in the crowd when they killed our father. I saw you standing there with Cersei and Joffrey," Arya said quietly. "You were?" "Oh, Arya. I begged them to spare father. I went on my knees and pleaded for father's life. You have to believe me. Sansa desperately took Arya's hand in her own while looking at her with tearful eyes. Of course I do, said Arya, hugging her sister, who cried on her shoulders. Arya rubbed circles on her sister's back as they sat on the floor while hugging each other. You don't have to worry, you know. Daeron won't allow Cersei to live. Even if he did, I won't. Arya muttered, feeling Sansa hug her tightly. Arya felt a warmth spread through her body and a weight she didn't even know in her mind disappeared. I think I just forgave Sansa for everything, Arya thought, unable to suppress the grin that adorned her lips as she nuzzled against her older sister's shoulder. The following day Arya was inside Daeron's chambers with Sansa by her side. Daenerys was also present, and going by the glow on the face of the queen, the two had an enjoyable night. She was happy for them, truly. But they could at least pretend to be a little less obvious. Even now, she could see Daeron's hold on Daenerys would linger from time to time. At first, it was an innocent touching which later developed into her cousin openly holding the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms by her waist. Arya could only sigh when she noticed Daeron's hand, which was innocently resting on the Queen's waist, was slowly but surely climbing upwards. She was slowly getting afraid that the pair of them would start undressing right this moment if this went on. Thankfully, Sansa finally finished what she wanted to say, which was a long-winded appeal of asking Daeron to deny Cersei the trial of combat. Neither of them thought Cersei would get out of the execution, but Sansa was adamant that Cersei was shown not a shred of mercy. You do not have to worry about this, Sansa. I assure you, there won't be a trial of combat, Daeron promised. I think it's time such laws are dismissed altogether. Combat between two warriors should not determine the sentencing of a crime, Daenerys said boldly, leaning closer to Daeron. There can be hardly any justice if the skill of arms determines the outcome of a dispute. We might as well proclaim the strong wins and the weak lose. You're right, of course, love. But these things need to be handled delicately. The trial by combat is a method for the lords and knights to get out of crimes, and the faith obviously likes the religious connection to the tradition, said Daeron. But Sansa is correct, no? Perhaps the trial by combat could be outlawed in the Crownlands and the North, Daenerys suggested. I'll think about it. In the meantime, I have a letter to draft for Sir Wylis. Arya nodded but stayed on her spot while Sansa exited the room. You are pregnant, aren't you? Arya suddenly asked, staring at Daenerys once Sansa closed the door behind her. What? How did you? Daenerys spluttered before turning accusing eyes on her husband. Did you tell her? No, I didn't, Daeron said with a defeated sigh while he noticed Arya's triumphant smirk. Then how did she? Daenerys looked questioningly at Arya. She learned it from your reaction. She didn't know, but your reaction gave it away, said Daeron, letting out a long-suffering sigh. Oh. Daenerys looked embarrassed. You two can't keep your hands off each other, and you're both always smiling and kissing. There are already rumors, said Arya with a shrug. Oh, congratulations, by the way. Thank you, Arya. Daenerys smiled, pulling her into a hug. I'd really appreciate it if you won't tell anyone else. Until the war is over, we'd like to keep it a secret. I guess I can do that, Arya muttered, pulling back from her cousin. Arya doubted she'd have to say anything. People would most likely find out on their own. But she didn't say that to Daeron and Daenerys. Eve got a question though. Is Daenerys going to participate in the war? Arya asked. Of course I am. Why do you think I came here with Drogon? Daenerys asked incredulously. But won't the baby be in danger? Arya asked hesitantly, making Daenerys freeze. Arya realized the queen had not thought about that particular matter going by the way she was touching her belly with concern. But her cousin, on the other hand, did not look shaken. I'm concerned for the safety of Daenerys and the child we are having together. I'm also concerned about Bran, Sansa, Rickon and even you, Arya. am concerned about the safety of the men, women and children of the north and the rest of Westeros. Therefore, I want to ask Daenerys to sit out this war. We'll fight the great war with all our strength and win. Arya sat up straight as she heard the conviction and strength in Daeron's words. She supposed this was why her cousin became king. Daeron watched Arya take her leave from his chamber with his message of summons for gathering a council. He should have called the council immediately after he arrived, but the internal squabbles among the northern lords took up more of his time than he preferred. I didn't even think about our child. Daenerys suddenly spoke up, making Daeron look at his wife. You said it yourself, love. You only came to realize you're pregnant recently, said Daeron, taking her hand in his to comfort her as he could see she was disturbed. No. It's not right that I forget what's most important to me, Daenerys muttered. Don't tell me the maternal instincts are taking over this early. Daeron internally groaned as he watched the horror-filled face of his wife, as if she had come to some sort of revelation. Daenerys, he called, squeezing her hand, but she didn't respond, walling herself off in her thoughts. Dany! He shook her slightly, and that broke the spell. The deep breath she let out made him realize his wife had even forgotten to breathe. He even saw a tear rolling down from one of her eyes. Daeron left his seat and stood before Daenerys on his knee, taking both her hands in his own. I will not ask you not to fight in the war against the others despite knowing it'll put you and our child in danger. Do you know why? Daeron asked. Because it's our duty to fight for our people? Said Daenerys, looking confused. No. A coward will die 1,000 times before he dies. The valiant die but once, said Daeron, rubbing away the tears that fell from his wife's eyes. The dragon always has 3 heads. When the maesters write the tale, they'll say 3 dragons fought in the long night. The 3rd head of the dragon is in your womb, love. Remember that, always. Before anything else could be said between them, servants entered their chamber to set the table for the meeting. Daenerys remained demure even as many lords streamed into their chamber for the meeting. Daeron kept his hold on her hand throughout the meeting, even though many eyes were constantly staring at them. He had no reservations about being there for someone he loved, even in the presence of strangers. Sometimes, it becomes ineffable to express solidarity with someone who is in pain. In such situations, the spirit must do the talking. Daeron reflected, intertwining his fingers with his wife's. While he kept his ears focused on the preparations made by the north, his heart was with the woman carrying his child. It is such a strange feeling to know I will be a father in a few months, Daeron decided. All his instincts were screaming at him to take his wife away from the north and live on some far-off island instead of facing off against a zombie army. But the rational part of his mind had so far kept him grounded. He hoped the same would happen for Daenerys. A distracted warrior on a battlefield is a dead warrior, Daeron thought grimly, eyeing Daenerys out of the corner of his eyes as he agreed with the general plan being proposed in the disposition of the grand army assembled at the wall. So, we are all in agreement. The main force will muster at Mole Town with the support of the Free Folk, the Red Priests, and the Giants. We'll leave 2 more troops on our flanks at a reasonable distance away should they need to reinforce the Shadow Tower or Eastwatch by the Sea supported by the Children of the Forest. The reserve army shall remain near Queen's Crown, Daeron said, concluding the meeting. Where shall your grace and the Queen be present? Lady Midge Mormont asked. We'll both be present at Mole's Town as the enemy has mustered more strongly beyond the wall close to Castle Black. Should the need arise, we'll support the other armies on our dragons. The enemy controls the cold, and we'll make sure to meet them with fire using wildfire and dragon fire. Once the meeting concluded, Daeron relaxed in his seat with Daenerys beside him. We'll win, and we'll see our child grow. I promise, Daeron assured his wife, kissing the back of her hand. How can you be sure? Daenerys asked tenderly. Because that's what I choose to believe. he said firmly. For a moment, they sat there in comfortable silence. Will it be a boy or a girl? Daenerys asked, placing her hand against her belly. I hope it's a girl. Really? You don't want a boy? Daenerys asked curiously. Well, I'd prefer a girl over a boy. Aren't you worried about the succession? Asked Daenerys. Why? You have conclusively shown that a woman can rule and even build kingdoms from scratch. Any daughter of ours would stand above 1,000 kings Westeros has ever seen. Daeron said arrogantly, with a pompous look that made Daenerys break out into peals of laughter. Excerpts from the Beginnings of a Modern Society and Westerosi Common Law by Dr. Marcus Bendelin. Some historians attribute the foundation of Westerosi common law came from the legal reforms brought forth by Jaehaerys Targaryen I. While such claims have a grain of truth, it is never the whole truth. As with history, any claim must be verifiable to ascertain its veracity because history must be rooted in facts, not conjecture. It's true that Jaehaerys Targaryen I inherited a chaotic realm steeped in blood, death, and war. It was a time of chaos, betrayal, fanatism, and madness. The House of the Dragon suffered greatly under the tyrannical rule of Maegor the Cruel, the despotic rule of Aenys, and the short but uneasy rule of Aegon the Dragon. House Targaryen's reign over the Seven Kingdoms remained threatened with the faith of the Seven openly opposing the Valyrian customs of House Targaryen despite the High Septon crowning Aegon Targaryen and his sister wives as the king and queens of the Seven Kingdoms a few decades ago. King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne were indeed the architects of a revitalized framework of laws that bound the Seven Kingdoms together, barring Dorne, unlike any monarch before them. Unfortunately, their reforms did not improve the lives of ordinary citizens or small folk, as the Lords of Westeros snidely called them. The justice system that had so far been under the purview of the Septons of the Faith of the Seven suddenly found itself diluted. This dilution came heavily in favor of the Lords and Knights as their right to invoke a trial by combat essentially made all trials useless and into a test of swordsmanship and luck. This dilution was looked upon favorably by the nobility, and in return, House Targaryen received the exceptionality they wanted to hold on to their Valyrian customs. Jaehaerys Targaryen formally became the first king to ascend the throne as the defender of the faith, tying the Unknown religion to the Iron Throne. King Daeron Targaryen III, however, overhauled the entire legal system of Westeros one step at a time throughout his reign. Not only did he tear down the old decrepit legal system that overwhelmingly favored those with enough gold and political power, but he also established common law for all Westerosi, enshrining certain inalienable rights to his subjects. This is why most historians consider King Daeron Targaryen's reign as the most progressive monarch Westeros had ever seen until then, despite his harsh actions against his enemies. The first reform he introduced to the legal system of Westeros was the dilution of the trial by combat. King Daeron was adept at finding the correct lane to implement policies during his reign as the king of Westeros. While some critics attribute this ability to his ruthless reputation, there is more than meets the eye as with any historical figure. Daeron Targaryen aptly concluded that his hold on the Seven Kingdoms was not ironclad. Therefore, he charted out all his policies in a progressive format. He first diluted an established law he wanted to be removed, and then had consistently implement the modified law in King's Landing and Dragonstone before enforcing it everywhere else. Not only did his methods ensure stability, but he also had the chance to study the effects of the modified law and make necessary reforms to the shortcomings he observed in his own policies. Such self-reflection, self-criticism, openness, and a sense of concern were unseen in any monarch until that point in history. This made King Daeron stand out as one of the towering examples of a disciplined mind and well-thought politician. A famous quote from the illustrious king is mentioned in a book by King Daeron's closest friend Maester Samwell Tarly. The laws that I implement are for the convenience of as many people as possible to improve upon their social and economic liberties. I don't make laws to make myself famous. In short, a good lawmaker should remember that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. This quote is etched in golden letters in every book and court of law. The wisdom in the words of a man who lived thousands of years in the past still guides the founding principles of the Kingdom of Valinor. Therefore, it is no surprise that the Supreme Court of Valinor sits on the place where Joffrey Waters and Cersei Lannister unjustly executed King Daeron's uncle Eddard Stark. It was also the place where the execution of Cersei Lannister was conducted by Sir Willis Manderly, the hand of King Daeron III, in 305 AC. Cersei Lannister's demand for a trial by combat to clear her name despite even the testimony of her own twin, Jaime Lannister, made King Daeron dilute the laws regarding the trial by combat in King's Landing. The modified law only afforded such a right if the defendant and the prosecution mutually agreed for a trial by combat to commence. In the case of Cersei Lannister, the Crown refused to entertain the demand of the former queen on account of her glaring crimes against the faith of the Seven. The Crown successfully convinced the assembled courtiers at the time that Cersei Lannister's act of burning down the Great Sept of Baelor using wildfire was an act of terror perpetrated against a religious community. As such, Cersei Lannister did not deserve to be given any form of an escape route from the verdict of the royal court by shielding herself under a religious law when she had openly declared war against said religion. Even the Starry Sept of Old Town wholeheartedly agreed with the assessment of King Daeron III. This event, while not that celebrated in history, marked the turning point in which King Daeron would bring about significant changes to the laws governing the citizens of his kingdom. In later years, King Daeron would go on to build a museum, a school and the first court of justicars in place of the Great Sept of Baelor. By the time his reign reached a decade, trial by combat was only allowed if two aggrieved parties mutually agreed and got permission from the Starry Sept. As the lords of Westeros could not settle their disputes crudely with swords and blood spilt, the demand for the king's justicars and his courts became the need of the hour. The king's decision to formulate separate courts for trade disputes only accelerated what later came to be known as the Justice Department and Judiciary of the Kingdom of Valinor. This is why King Daeron Targaryen is known as Daeron the Worthy to this day. For he, indeed, was worthy to be called the greatest of monarchs the world had ever seen. Daeron III's reforms were poignant and heterogeneous. He did not merely focus on archaic laws but also the economic policies, culture, art, sports, scientific inquiry and many such noble pursuits. As Daeron III often said, "My focus is not on preserving the archaic structures built by my ancestors. My purpose and my calling is to spin the wheel of civilization. The wheel had been idle for long. But now I'm here to move it." This is a direct quote attributed to Daeron III by Archmaester Marwyn and Maester Samwell Tarly. Most historians agree that this quote was made during the debate in the court regarding the decision to dissolve the Seven Kingdoms and proclaim the birth of a new one. The Kingdom of Valinor took birth in 314 AC on an auspicious day when Queen Daenerys gave birth to her third child. And a new era was born with the ascension of King Daeron and Queen Daenerys as the rulers of Valinor. The decade following the birth of Valinor was called the Decade of Ascent, as the common man and woman of the kingdom enjoyed greater rights and opportunities than ever. However, the most significant contribution Daeron III made to Westerosi citizens was his vision for the future. In the king's memoir, he describes his vision for the world in great detail in a chapter called Manifest Destiny of Valinorians. In this widely acclaimed chapter, the illustrious King of Valinor becomes a humane visionary as he connects his heart in holy union with the world's citizens and perhaps all life. His message resonates with every man, woman and child of the world to this day because he did not speak of conquest to his subjects, but of being in holy union with the people of the world with some preconditions. In his Manifest Destiny, Daeron speaks of morality, the key to happiness and the path to living a righteous life despite the reality of imperfection and challenges of human life. Every word in this chapter showed the immense wisdom, temperament, and deep understanding of human emotion, condition and spirit that the first king of Valinor held closely to his heart. His intent is evident as he shows a mirror to the world even in death, in case anyone forgets its beauty and life. This is why, on the tombstone of Daeron Targaryen, It is eloquently written, I say nothing to the dead. My words are only for the living. And if you think you are among the living, worry not. You are already in heaven. Take comfort in knowing that the King of Valinor envies you.